So I love Shaman King. It won't be an understatement that it's my favorite manga of all time, and for good reason. It's a story that dives a lot into the cultures and views on shamanism and afterlife around the world. A story that could feed you education together with the action and explosions, while having its own depth, plot, and theme. The same reason I loved Fate series back in the day and wish it stayed that way. So words couldn't describe my disappointment when the initial run of Shaman King manga was cut short back in 2004. Most likely from the pressuring competition from Bleach, what with them sharing the spirituality and death motive, and Bleach back then just admittedly had so much better pacing than Shaman King. Well, before it plummets itself later, but that's neither here nor there. I never finished the original 2001 Shaman King anime, after learning that it goes off manga and I wouldn't be able to see neither Bushin Jutsu or Serial in it. Which, just was really the sort of decision a 9 years old would make, but I kinda stand by that even now. I left the series alone for a real long while. Kinda missed the timing that Takei released the complete edition of the manga, which includes a real ending in 2008. Since back then, I couldn't read Japanese and I didn't have a clue when it was going to be serialized where I live. I only picked it back up to read in 2015 and I guess I was able to get the closure of 13 years. Though, yeah, I do feel that it still was rushed and the ending still wasn't the best. At least I have the sequel Shaman King Flowers to move on to, right? It's a sequel about Yoel and Anna's son, so it's definitely going to be fun. And it's cancelled in 2014, when the magazine Jump X got pulled altogether. Seriously, Takei and Shaman King just couldn't catch a break. Until now, that is. If you've clicked on this video, then chances are you've already known and is probably already watching the remake series. And I might say it does really look promising. If rather rushed with the wonky pacing currently, hopefully they're just doing the Brotherhood thing where they'll rush over the first few introductory parts, just so we can catch up to the manga quicker. So I hope the end product will also be Brotherhood level. Not to mention the 3 other spin-offs, Red Crimson and Marcos, which are the continuation of the first series but before Flowers, and Superstar, which kinda picked back up from where Flowers left off. So I guess the series is recovering now that it's being handled by Kodansha. Machi arigatou na, Kodansha. This is one of the reasons why Kodansha is the #1 company I'd like to work with on my novel career. Click on this annotation if you want to know more about that, but preferably after this video. But anyway, shameless plug aside, the topic I want to discuss today is where in the new anime that should be changed from the original manga. For one thing, the very first PV confirmed that the anime will rectify the missed opportunity of the manga, where Byakko and Kurobina never actually fought despite literally being made to contrast each other. So we know it's not going to be a one-to-one adaptation, which I'm always okay with, as long as it is an improvement and not whatever the hell Promised Neverland is doing. As stated before, I love Shaman King. It's my lifelong favorite manga series, but as everything in life, I don't believe that just because you love it that you also have to convince yourself that it's flawless, that no one's allowed to criticize it. The true way to love is to love it despite the flaws. Shaman King is a flawed manga, and therefore I believe that the new anime is the perfect opportunity for the flaws to be fixed. Though of course I also don't want to derail the plot, so the fixes are all going to be minor. So now let's dive in, shall we? So the flaw I think most people can agree with, the resurrection. After volume 17, that has become increasingly cheap in Shaman King. Characters can die and be resurrected in the same fight just because. A total of 4 characters can just casually bring back the dead. And it's supposed to be understandable, considering 3 of them are canonically the strongest characters in the series and Faust kinda dedicated his entire life trying to research resurrection. So I don't really have issues against the numbers of people who can revive, but It's the number of how many times a revive was used. Especially since Iron Maiden, John, and Faust in the final arc literally don't do anything but just to be healing stations for the fighters. And I won't blame their thing about dead power-ups. I mean, culturally speaking, Jesus, Buddha, Odin, and Osiris have all attained higher levels through death or near-death experiences. So it's not like it's culturally irrelevant. Especially in the Shaman King world, which allude that these gods and saviors were previous winners of the shaman fight. In a story literally about death and spiritualism, it's natural to presume that most of these protagonists should also go through similar experiences in order to gain enlightenment, aka in shonen speak, power up. And I mean, going back to the education part, if Takei wants to show the different cultures' version of the afterlife, then there isn't really much options and, well, have each characters from different cultures die and go to their respective afterlife. So I think the best option would just be to trim out the non-plot related resurrections. Don't revive the minor characters if they're not going to do anything afterward or cannot do that thing as a ghost. How's gonna revive the rest of them at the end of the story anyway, so there doubly isn't a point. Otherwise, if they have something else to do afterward and their death doesn't contribute anything to the plot, don't kill them. Likewise, don't kill the major characters if you're just going to revive them an episode later. If you need to put them out of commission, knock them out, cut off their limbs to prevent them from fighting, just don't kill so you don't have to revive them. Especially in the final arc in the plant fights against the Patch Priest, though we'll be talking about that later. And if you need to get the character to the afterlife, then there also is the option of making them do astral projection. So basically their soul leaves their body, go to another plane of existence, but it's all on their own terms and their bodies remains alive, if only in comatose state. Effectively, it achieved the same result as dying, going to the afterlife, fight whatever boss to get your power up, but no resurrection is required, therefore neither the notion of dying nor resurrection becomes cheapened. Second are some of the characters that seem shoehorned in. I'm specifically talking about characters of Hans Reicheit, who was said to be the former member of the X-Laws but got exiled for his violent behavior before he was hired by Manta's dad to kill Hao, only to die right after. Right in the one chapter he debuted in. I mean, when I read this chapter, even as a 9 years old, this character felt really shoehorned to me. He was never mentioned before, then he suddenly popped up and suddenly Marco and Lucas hype him up as having higher power level than even the Spirit of Fire. Then boom, he's gone. Same thing happens to the cursed woman he's with. So I mean, what's the point of these two characters? Now, as an adult and as a writer myself, I understood that they were indeed shoehorned in. He's a character Takei invented long after the X-Laws was already in the story, but as Takei was fighting against the weekly scramble schedule of the Shonen magazine, there's two options why he was included in the story. One, Takei thought of either Reicheit and or Azazel's design long after already introducing the X-Laws, but nevertheless, like either or both of their designs so much that he wants to put them into the story somehow. But with the plot already going on, he has to put them in the way that won't divert the story. I mean, as a designer myself, I understand that feeling. Though I also know that it's not the greatest thing to pull exactly because it will lead to the character feeling shoehorned like this. Second is that there's simply that. Ways to stall for time. As Reicheit appears before the Mu Continent arc, the supposed climax arc where the plot suffers a lot of pacing and planning problems that led to its initial cancellation. But thinking as Takei on the spot when he was writing, once you jump into this arc, it's going to be hard to break the plot. And since he was already poorly preparing for it, he had to use Reicheit and the Cursed Lady to stall for 2 weeks worth of time, so he can plan the arc out better. I don't know which of the two reasons are real, but my point is that the weekly grind also led to many other characters feeling rather half-baked. So now that he has 18 years to smoothen it out, especially with how Reinhardt has a much more major role in the spin-off sequel Shaman King Marcos, I hope they no longer feel like such wasted potentials in the main series. Carrying on with the X-Laws, the Angels and the spotty planning, what's the deal with the Archangels? At first we're told there are real Abrahamic angels the X-Laws channeled through the blessed bullets, which puts them like on the top tier of cool among all the spirits. But then we learn that they're not real angels. They're more like the Tsukumogami of Shinto, where the objects that are well taken care of will gain a spirit and sentience of its own after 100 years. But in this case, the angels' true identities are cars. This is a very other obvious shoehorn-in aspect, especially since all the angels have their designs changed to incorporate car components, turning them into skinny transformers. This was obviously Takei appealing to his car fetish, especially since I remember that in one of the volumes he also included an extra one-shot chapter about car racing or something in it as well, which really felt out of place and weird, especially to a 9-year-old kid. More strangely, in the sequel spin-off series Shaman King Red Crimson and Marcos, the angels are redesigned again, some with the car aspect intact and some without. I mean, most importantly, they just nerf angels into car ghost. I mean, what the hell? Yeah, and I know that later on this was retconned once again that the spirits of angels were indeed summoned into the cars, so it's a compromise. But, I mean, imagine the feeling of a 9-year-old kid reading that at the time. So I hope that the anime adaptation handled this better and more consistently. I don't mind if they wanna use the skinny transformer design, but then use it from their first appearance just so it would be consistent. But who are we kidding? There are mechas being animated in 2021, so of course they're gonna be 3D and they're gonna use the same model throughout. Hopefully. Then there's the issue with Chocolove. At first I was gonna talk about how they need to change its design since the original is indeed insensitive, but it appears that they're already doing that, so I guess that's the win. It's not much, but that's like most of the changes I'm suggesting here. Just some subtle fixes if it means for a better end product. Look, I don't feel that as far as the character writing goes, Chocolove is a racist character. I mean, he's as fleshed out as any other party members. It's still chosen as one of the 5 legendary heroes. And look, by pure power level numbers alone, he's the strongest. Then the other 2 problem characters I feel are Ryu and Faust, since it's undeniable that they were underdeveloped and felt like they don't contribute much in the later arcs despite being Yo's very own teammates. Though I'm kinda on the fence for this because as a kid I never really cared for them. This is partly because Ren is my favorite character, so I care more about his team, and also because they're the adult characters in the shonen manga, so go figures. But as I have reread the manga later now as an adult, I now see how much of a wasted potential they were, so it's kinda the split. Partly if this new anime is meant to be for the shonen demographic, as I was myself back then, that it might indeed be fine to prioritize keeping the plot pacing moving than put time on these 2 characters. But if it's meant to appeal to the nostalgic crowd as I am now, then I feel like they should be given more. I don't recall either Ryu or Faust winning any major boss fights themselves, so yeah, they really need to be given something. And yes, to be technical, they did have some spotlight and contributions. Ryu has his growth arc going from a bully thug to a full-fledged shaman and Yo's trusted ally. But after that he was just kinda around and that's it. Ryu's arc should do something to emphasize on his belief on trying to find his ideal best place, in why he believes so strongly that he will find it under Yo. Something to flesh out the reason for his loyalty better. It's okay to have extremely loyal characters as long as they don't become the Sasuga Ain-sama who literally cannot talk about anything outside of their master. Maybe you can even give him an arc where he grows into a more paternal role, and focus to foreshadow his role as a father figure to Hana in Flowers. Likewise, Faust did contribute as the healer in the final arc, but again, since resurrections were the part we don't like and want to cut out, that render Faust even more useless. Worse is, Faust doesn't even get his own arc like Ryu at all. For God's sake, half of House Mooks have more of an arc than him. Giving him an arc can be quite easy. He originally is conceptually identical to Mr. Freeze. A good man of science who dedicated his whole life, including being willing to do evil, for the sake of bringing his wife back to life. So they can easily explore more on this part, both on his dedication and the dynamics between him, Yo, and Ryu, since he is the most morally grey of the three. And I mean, for God's sake, give Elisa an actual personality too. Oh, and circling a bit back to the X-Laws, I'd love to see Iron Maiden, John, and Ren interact more. The two are married in Flowers, but in the original series, I do not recall there was even a single scene where the two interacted. Aside from Iron Maiden giving Ren the unnecessary revive the one time. And then, of course, we're talking about the final arc. The Mu Continent arc where they just fight the Patch Priest through one plant to another and on and on and on. It was supposed to be a climactic arc, but the pacing dragged on so long and the battles are mostly uninteresting because not only were they repetitive, they're against characters many of which we barely know of before, and the battles are either one-on-one, leaving the rest to just stand idly by looking useless like DBZ supporting cast, or they gang up together only to proceed to get owned one after another, which isn't really what you'd like to see in the final arc when you assume the heroes are supposed to be at or are nearing their power cap. Not that getting owned even matters much, since any death can be easily shrugged off by having two resurrectors in the party. Which was the fault that caused the initial manga run to be axed when Shaman King lost the competition against Bleach, which is kinda ironic in hindsight, isn't it? Considering repetitive, draggy battles against character we don't care was the exact same reason that caused the downfall of Bleach, and ultimately getting it axed. Only that Bleach took like 8 years longer to go down. And it's doubly ironic because in the 2008 Kansenbang where Takei was allowed to write new chapters to wrap up the story, these new patch fight ended up feeling really rushed, especially if you read it right off the back of the initial run fights. It definitely was because even when given the chance to end his story, Takei still was limited by just how many pages he'll be allowed. There are many ways you can fix this arc. For one, the simplest, make the battle solo. Instead of the RPG style where the whole main cast gang up on each priest, just have them go one-on-one. Because otherwise in each fight in the manga proper, the battles are largely focused on only one party member per fight anyway, leaving the rest just on standby. So instead just have them all go one-on-one. This should help with the pacing issue. Give everyone equal opportunity to do something, and with it being more personal, it should be easier to also make the enemy priest be more interesting. There are 10 patch priest bosses and 9 party allies, so just make Ruta 4, the last, be the only one where the party actually gang up on the priest, and we have a fair good number. Yo, Horohoro and Lizard should face against Silva, Kalim, and Braun, respectively, as they were all the patch priests in charge of them, with personal bonds. Likewise, Ren faces off against Necrom since they have personal beef against each other. These can go down relatively the same way they did in the original manga, only that it's solo. Renim was one-shotted by Obacho in the original manga without the rest of the team even acknowledging he existed, so he can be paired up with her. It's essentially a free skip, which should be a blessing in this arc where pacing is really tight. Ryu has the most prominent fights against Namari in the originals, so he can also keep that. Only, actually let him win the battle. Sokolov can take either Talim or Radim. Talim because he did finish him off in the original manga, but I'd be more prone to giving him Radim, as the battle of the two supposed joke characters would turn out to be very deadly when serious. So in turn, give Talon to Faust. As a change of pace, I think the battle should be done to a standstill at first, only for Talon to offer Faust some coffee they can just sit and talk over, since Talon is the most pacifist of the Patch Priest, and Faust looked like he'd be the most willing to talk. And I mean, again, we need to flesh the man out more. Also, having one of these plants be solved without fighting should also help freshen up and give diversity in this arc, already criticized for its repetitiveness. The two talk it out, discussing the reason they fight, while having subtle mind games as they try to set up traps around the area without ever moving from the coffee table, in a competition that whoever loses the argument and their cool will get one-shotted. Though as Talon has the home field advantage, as well as Faust doesn't have the skeletons he can use, Faust looks to be at massive disadvantage. Yet ultimately, when they draw the argument to an end, with Faust showing his dedication to Elisa, Talon backs down himself, taking Faust's trap, saying that while he utterly outgunned Faust, he is incomparable in terms of faith and dedication. And by process of elimination, we get Magna versus Iron Maiden Jump. Since Magna didn't have any personal relations to anyone else, so essentially we can also just skip this battle, to having John curb stomp like the way she always did. But in turn, I do feel that after Root of 4 battle, Goldva should also be given a proper battle, not just insta-killed by Howl for the lulz. I genuinely believe that she originally would also have been given a full fight, if not for Takei realizing that he is running real short on how many pages he has left for the Kansenban. She can also be another battle the whole group can gang up on, give her a more dignified defeat and lead up to Howl's battle. Anyway, this is dragging longer than I expected and I only got halfway through the script, so we'll be continuing to part 2 of this next week. Please subscribe to see it, and since this is still a very new channel, every subscribe, like and comment would be very helpful and appreciated. If you agree or disagree with any ideas in particular so far, feel free to discuss them in the comments below and I will try my best to read all of them. If you like this brainstorming session, please like and subscribe for more content similar to this. I usually have pitching ideas for my own novels, and videos of free anime style premised giveaway for the sake of inspiring you to take up your own writing career. All for the sake of saving the anime industry. So please check their playlist out if you're interested and stay tuned for more. I also have a series of videos explaining why light novels became known as being so unoriginal and exploitative, so please check that out too if you're interested. Thank you for watching and let's meet again in part 2.